Hi, this is Randy Freeman, and I am the host for today's Braver Angels podcast. We're going to be talking about the film Abortion Talks. We have with us the one of the producers for the film, Sarah Perkins, who will tell us a little bit more about the film and a little bit about the background. The film was presented a few weeks ago at Braver Angels, and I attended and thought it was so powerful. I wanted to keep talking about it and wanted more people to hear about it.
We never expected it to happen in Massachusetts, honestly. At least I didn't.
Boston was in some ways an epicenter of tension for this. It's a highly Catholic city.
You open up a newspaper and that's all you read is about abortion, abortion, abortion.
It felt kind of like a powder keg.
Something had to give.
She put her hands up to her face, and he shot her right through the throat.
You accept absolutely no responsibility in the pro-life movement.
We are not responsible for these murders.
It polarized everybody. You were either pro-choice or pro-life.
I remember the first question the prosecution asked me, "So you're involved in the anti-abortion movement," he said. I said, "No." "You're not?" "No." "What are you involved in the pro-life movement?" I said.
The ambiance that created the tragedy was a collective responsibility.
I felt I owed it to the situation to try to tamp down the rhetoric and the polarization.
I became president of Planned Parenthood in 1974.
I was serving as vice president of Mass Citizens for Life.
I don't think the pro-life women would have agreed to meet with us if it were not for that tragedy, for which I think they felt some guilt.
They had to be absolutely confidential.
If the people on our side learned about this, they would not be happy with us.
We met in a windowless basement.
We went as if we were going to the guillotine.
We had never done this before, or anything like this, and it was scary. Eventually, we became friends.
Just the fact of the dialogue happening was remarkable.
So without further ado, I'm going to have Donna Murphy talk about why we showed the film at Braver Angels and the importance, a little bit about what she saw in the film. And then after Sarah Perkins, our producer, will talk, Wynette Sills, Molly Zeff, Donna and I will have a discussion about the impact of the film on all of us of diverse backgrounds on this issue. So Donna, if you could tell a little bit about the film, we'd appreciate it.
Sure, I'm Donna Murphy, and Molly Zeff and I are two of the leaders of the Braver Angels Film Club. And Sarah Perkins' husband, Josh Saby, these two amazing people co-directed and co-produced this film. He contacted the film club and asked us would we be interested in showing and discussing this film. So I watched it, and I watched a longer version because they do have a multi-part version as well that's 4 hours long. The version that we screened for the Braver Angels Film Club was 1.5 hours. The portion that best pertained to us, because it was about the dialogue between these 6 women, 3 pro-choice and 3 pro-life in terms of the abortion issue. So I watched it and I thought, oh my goodness, this is amazing. They nailed it in terms of the spirit of Braver Angels, in terms of the spirit of people who disagree with each other, being able to talk to each other and get along. How badly we need that in this country. And so I immediately I wanted to have the abortion talks be discussed in the Braver Angels Film Club. I hope that other members of Braver Angels will also decide to show it and discuss it within their alliances or other organizations, because this film, I think, needs to be seen.
Thank you, Donna. Sarah, I have some questions for you about the film. We're very, very curious about the genesis of the film. Is there a moment when you and Josh said, we have to do this? Could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, first, thank you so much for such a kind introduction, Donna. That was lovely to hear. And for this opportunity. So we'd been concerned about what we perceived to be a growing level of toxicity and polarization across the United States for many years, from our undergrad on. And then I think we always had in our minds that we wanted to make a film to address that, because that was something that was very concerning to us and that we were really passionate about. You know, Josh in particular, I think, has always been somebody who's interested in talking about uncomfortable things in a way that's kind and that opens up conversations rather than shutting them down. And so I think it was something that we cared about and had planned to do for a long time, but particularly over the last couple of years, I think as there's been some really hallmark moments of intense polarization, we felt really driven to get this film done and to get it out there to the world.
During the film, I noticed that the filmmaker's views on abortion did not come through in any way. Was that intentional?
Yes, that was. We were really studious about trying to keep any directorial bias out of the abortion issue itself. And I'll say two things on that. One, like, that was necessary to get the women on board. Like, it wouldn't have happened if we had come at this with an issue position that we were going to be pushing. And two, this documentary is unusual, I think, in that it's a film where almost every character has really strong, passionate opinions about abortion, but the film itself is not really ultimately about abortion. It's about a conversation that was able to happen around that issue, more so than the issue itself. And so in that sense, having an issue position ourselves come through in the film wasn't necessary. It didn't make sense for what we were trying to do.
Thank you. What was it like for you and Josh to actually meet some of these people later on, years later, to interview them and to get to know them and see more about their lives and their involvement? What was it like for the two of you?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to express just how lovely these women are. It was one of just the most delightful things I've ever experienced as a filmmaker, meeting these, like, you know, it's when you're a documentary filmmaker, it's something you get to do a lot is sit down with people for a long time and get to know their stories in a pretty profound and intimate way. That's, I think, one of my favorite parts of this job. But particularly with these women, and particularly around this issue and this story, it was remarkable, I think, how just graceful, I guess, for lack of a better word, they were at discussing this experience and discussing their relationships with each other, even though they continued to passionately disagree. I think the relationships just continue to be strong, and that was remarkable to see in both in individual interviews and then also when we had all of the women come together for a few different sessions. Seeing those relationships in action, I thought, was really remarkable. You know,
it came across in the film for sure. What was the most powerful moment for you and Josh? Was there one moment that really, really came across as powerful?
Yeah. So I think it's Susan who talks about this idea of civic fusion, how you can get people who disagree passionately together and get them to develop close enough relationships that instead of repelling like they would normally be want to do, they can actually connect in a really powerful way. And that's something that I think just rings so true with diversity of thought and polarization, where, you know, diversity and opposing perspectives, there's a lot of energy there, and it can be destructive, or you can harness it in a powerful way and do something really remarkable. And I think we've seen a lot of destructiveness. You know, and certainly we've had personal relationships that have been damaged just because of opposing perspectives. And I think across the United States, there's been some really dreadful things that have come about because of just the difficulty of harnessing that ideological diversity. And so I think to see women who were able to come together over the thing that they disagreed about and forge really potent, deep relationships is remarkable. And I think Susan's analogy to fusion captured that really well.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly, with my sort of hybrid view on abortion, which I'll talk about later, I recently lost a friend over it who was pro-choice, and she just couldn't tolerate my view, excuse me. I'm wondering if you're hoping that this film will make a difference in that way, that maybe it will be less a force of destruction and more of a force of people at least hearing each other and making some changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, abortion is a difficult issue because it's so profoundly intimate to an individual's life and experience. But it's also, you know, it's an issue where there's it's like it's hard to draw really clear lines of like, this is clearly good and this is clearly wrong. And so in that sense, I think it's actually an issue that has a lot of potential to bring people together and to explore some of the nuances and the difficulties of sitting together and forging a productive way through what's a pretty hazy waters, I think.
Yeah, and it makes it difficult that it's become so politicized as well. It makes it really difficult for people to really hear each other very often. Yeah, and that's something I would also say what was fascinating in this project. You know, we have these two sides, pro-life and pro-choice, but there's a lot of variation in those two sides as well, where the way that women would talk about their issues, where they would come down on different aspects of their issues, different places of discomfort, on their own perspectives. That was really interesting. And so I guess I would just say, like, we talk about this as this sort of polarized issue, but there's you know, there's many nuances and shades of gray even within sort of the two camps. And I think that's useful to realize as we're talking about it. Do you think the fact that they were genuinely curious with each other afterwards actually lent to that kind of atmosphere where those nuances could come out a little bit? You know, that very often we're not that way in real life or in politics. Do you think that kind of curiosity and time actually helped?
Yeah, I think it lent to a real era of intellectual humility that allowed the conversations to thrive. Nikki Nichols Gamble, she was the head of Planned Parenthood League of Massachusetts. She was talking in an interview, I don't remember if it made it into the hour-and-a-half version, but she was talking about how she feels sincerely you can't be a very good leader unless you're willing to acknowledge the weak points in your own argument, that there are weak points and that's okay. Like you're not going to have a totally bulletproof argument, and to present it as if there's nothing wrong that could be found in it is dangerous. And so I think sitting down with people who they passionately disagreed with, who they acknowledged as intelligent, who they had strong relationships with, and being able to have that sort of intellectual humility to acknowledge the weak points in their argument rather than just poking holes in the other person, I think made them stronger in their own issue positions as well. Is something that they talk about, how they became more passionate and clear in heart and mind about their own activism because they had to really figure out more precisely what they believed, why they believed it, and places where issues that they had represented previously that were maybe not so true for them.
Yeah. Which is interesting. It really coincides with what we do in Braver Angels, which is we do try to look at the weaknesses on our own side, which again comes from a place of humility and then opens up people on the other side to do the same. So that's a very interesting component of the film. What's it been like for the two of you to disseminate the film? Again, this is such a controversial topic. What's that been like for you? And are there any surprises that came along?
Yeah, so I think it's sort of this tale of two stories with the dissemination. We've on the one hand been really well received. I think it's true that the majority of Americans on this issue are actually fairly middle ground. And again, I think it speaks to the complexity of the issue that's not clearly right one way or the other necessarily. And so I think once we've had like individuals seeing the film, it's been really well received. People have responded really well to it. I think distributors have struggled. And I think not surprisingly to most people, Hollywood tends to be a little bit of an ideological monolith. And so, like we sent it to HBO and they responded, "Oh, we've already covered the abortion issue with our documentary on the Janes," which I think is, it's just a totally different sort of series than ours and is doing something very different than what we're doing. And that's something we've run into a couple of times. I think just, it's like I said, it's an explosive issue. And so people are anxious to take up something that's not sort of toting a party line. And that's unfortunate, because I don't think it's actually representative of the majority of Americans to come down really hard one way or the other.
Yes. Have your views been altered in any way after seeing the film?
Yeah, going into this, I think ambivalent is maybe the wrong word, but I think I recognize that this is a really complex issue and not something that I felt like I was super confident in my issue perspectives. So it's interesting because the women who participated in the dialogue talk about how they became clear in heart and mind about their issue positions. I think for me, I experienced the opposite, where I think I just felt this sort of general appreciation for almost anybody we met who was involved in this issue. A couple weeks ago, we had a screening in Boston where we had the leader of Mass Citizens for Life in attendance. We had the person who was running the clinic, the manager of the clinic that John Salvi committed the murders at, was in attendance. We had people who protest pretty regularly outside of abortion clinics present. We had abortion clinic what is it titled? The people who help people get into the clinics through the protesters present. So it was, exports. Thank you. Escorts. So it was a remarkably diverse audience, and that's worrisome, right? Like that's a little stressful to have all those people in the audience. But one, they all really appreciated the film, and two, I think talking with them, it was fascinating, like with my own experience, realizing, you're somebody who's been protesting outside of abortion clinics for 30 years. That takes real commitment. Like I can appreciate that. And then talking with the person who was working in the clinic, like that would be really exhausting and frustrating walking through protesters regularly. I can appreciate that. That would be hard. And so I think just this sort of massive increase in appreciation and recognition of the real goodness, I think, in so many people involved in this issue has been something that I didn't expect, but has been my experience coming away from this. And I think also I have now a real hope that the sort of gentleness and kindness that these women brought to this issue in their conversations with each other is possible. You know, beyond the conversations that took place in that basement. I'll just tell a quick story that didn't make it into the documentary that I love. Madeline McComish, she's like 5 feet tall. She was the head of Mass Citizens for Life, and she was at a march, for a pro-life march, and there was a counter protest, and somebody there was protesting their march. And there was a protester there, a counter protester, who was starting to get sunburned. And so Madeline stopped her and she said, "You should really wear sunscreen. Here, let me get you some." And she like had her little protest fanny pack and she like pulled out her sunscreen and gave it to this counter protester who put it on. And they had this conversation where she was like, you know, there's really too many children in the world anyways. And Madeline says, "Oh, that's not so. Humans are the most wonderful thing." Which you know, I'm sure nobody changed their minds, but it was just this moment, like this humanizing moment, literally in the act of protesting, like representing the opposite sides of this issue on the streets, that I think is possible in a way that is often represented as, you know, when we're vilifying and demonizing the other side, it's not going to happen. But when we're able to greet each other as humans, even when we're actively trying to activate our sides, good can come of that.
That's a beautiful story, Sarah. It's too bad it wasn't in the documentary, but it really is. You know, what we do at Braver Angels is we get to know people that, you know, ordinarily we might be demonizing, and seeing that really are human, and that they have stories behind their feelings and their beliefs. So that's a beautiful story, and it encapsulates everything that this film is, I think, hoping to portray. Is there, I guess, two things. If anybody has any other questions for Sarah before she has to go, do any of you have any questions? And then after that, I'd like you to tell people if they want to see a screening, you know, how can they go about doing it? Does anybody have any questions for Sarah? No?
I have a question.
Okay.
I looked around and it seemed like Wynette might as well. Yes, okay, I could tell. So, Sarah, my question for you is, how do you see, not that you can see the future, but how would you like to see the film have ripple effects in terms of creating other opportunities for these kinds of close relationships, even friendships, that also involve serious discussions among a more general population of people who care about both sides, but maybe aren't out there on the front lines necessarily? You know, the people who are a little hard to reach in the general population, but still feel strongly about this issue, basically, you know, will at some point, I assume, have general access to the film. So how would you like to see this film having ripple effects among just the general population of people who care about the issue?
Yeah. So I think there's so many wonderful organizations out there, like Braver Angels, and you know, many bridge building organizations. It would be fantastic if people got involved in those and were able to make connections. Because I think the wrong takeaway from this is go and talk to your neighbor. Just because, one, like most neighborhoods are sort of sorted into ideological similar positions anyways. And two, I think we deceive ourselves if we imagine that we're just naturally able to have conversations about really controversial issues with people we disagree about. That, like, again, that tends to be really explosive. It takes structures, it takes facilitators, it takes people who are trained in hosting these conversations and helping people bring their best selves to the conversations. And so yeah, I think that would be my hope, is that people get connected to the resources they need in order to have these conversations well, with people that they disagree with.
Okay. Lynette?
Sarah, I don't have a question for you, but just in case this is our only opportunity, knowing that you need to leave soon, as a pro-life leader here in California, I just wanted to wholeheartedly thank you and Josh. I promoted the premiere amongst my closest friends just because I wanted to preview it first myself, but I was so inspired and encouraged by the gift that you've given us that I would like to promote it in bringing not just neighbors together, but alpha leaders like those that you showcased in your documentary, so that it starts at the top and trickles down. I just loved the documentary, and so I just wanted to convey that message to you in the short time we have together.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot.
You and I did email each other about a showing here in California, but I've had some changes in my life in the recent weeks, along with Thanksgiving, of course, and I just haven't gotten back to you, but the desire is certainly as strong as ever. And so thank you. And Josh.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. Thank you. And certainly one of our hopes with the film is that we might be able to reopen the conversation, both with the women featured and also with the, their protege, the current leadership. And that's something we're working on behind the scenes.
I also be remiss if I didn't jump in here and say thank you. A huge thank you to you and Josh. Thank you for modeling that gratitude as well. So I just think it's great that you made the film. I was someone, and I'll mention this a little more later, I was someone who resisted showing a film on abortion because of some of the religious elements of people's views. And I'm glad that Donna and others convinced me to make it happen. So I think it was a great experience, and I could feel how people were touched. I could feel how I was touched during moments of the film, and other people were really touched by it. And that's powerful to see. It's a powerful model of how to engage with people who have different views than you and build relationships with them that are really positive. So thank you.
But I just want to add one other thing before Sarah leaves, because I wanted her to know that there were two people when we did our screening, and one person in the chat, she was very pro-choice, and she said she just couldn't imagine talking to somebody who was on the other side, who had protested outside of abortion clinics. And someone else who was pro-life saw that chat, and she volunteered to speak with this woman. And I offered to put the two together. The woman said she wasn't sure, she had to think about it. I finally heard from her this morning saying that yes, she would like to talk to the person on the other side, and I'm going to help facilitate that discussion. So there you go, Sarah. It's something concrete happening from your movie.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that.
And Donna, with your one-to-one program, that could be a really nice point of conversation between people.
I'm going to use the structure of the one-to-one red-blue conversation for that conversation.
That's great. Great. Sarah, could you tell us, or can you tell people how they could see a screening if they wanted to, or see it and then maybe have a screening of their own?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go to our website, abortiontalks.com, we have a schedule, a calendar up of screenings that are coming up. Also, you can host a screening yourself in your community, or with your church, or with your business organization, or whatever group that you feel like would benefit from seeing the abortion talks. We have grants available to help make those screenings happen. So, reach out to us through our website. Let's get in touch.
That's great. Thank you so much. And thank you for the film and for sharing some of the background with us today. And hopefully we'll get more people interested. And that was the intention. So thank you. And I hope your family is feeling better.
Thank you. All right. Have a good morning.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. So I thought we'd have a conversation about the impact of the film and maybe about our background. And I'd like to start, if you don't mind, because for me anyway, there were three pivotal moments in my life that kind of formed my view on abortion. And again, I mentioned that my view, this is Randy Freeman speaking, in case anybody's just listening. My view kind of evolved over time and is kind of a hybrid view. I started out just thoughtlessly pro-choice. And when I say thoughtlessly, it was just like, of course I'm pro-choice. And in 1974, which was 1 year after Roe v. Wade, I was at the time working in a public health department where I worked with schools, and I was giving a talk on health to a school district in Cincinnati in the Over the Rhine district, which is composed of mostly transplants from Appalachia, and they were very, very pro-life. And I was giving this talk, and one of the kids said, "Well, what are your thoughts about abortion?" And I thought I was being very open-minded, and I said, I feel like you can have your point of view and I could choose my point of view. And they just erupted on me. They were really angry. I mean, sit with a group of teenagers who were angry at you, it's not too cool. And I was really upset. It stayed with me. I didn't even know what to say. It stayed with me for the rest of my life, frankly. But the most important takeaway for me was there is a group of people in this country that are really passionate and they really feel strongly about this. And it was the first time that I realized it, and it hit me. The second pivotal moment for me was in the 80s when I attended a conference, and it wasn't about abortion, but it was sort of this liberal kind of hodgepodge. And there was a component of it that was pro-choice. And I found one of the pro-choice leaders and I started asking him a lot of questions. And as he answered the questions, I was not satisfied. I was like, I don't think I believe that. His belief was life begins at birth, period. And then I started thinking, I think at that time they started having NICUs and they started doing ultrasounds a little bit around that time. And I said, no, I don't feel this way. I don't believe this way. I think there's something more. And I decided that that I'm sort of a hybrid. I mean, I'm not 100% pro-choice and I'm not 100% pro-life. There are exceptions in my mind and time limits to when I believe an abortion should be done. But the thing that really put me over the edge and made me want to see the film was I had a very, very good friend, a recent friend, but she and I really clicked and we were friends for about 2 or 3 years, talked about things, did things together. And last year she brought up the abortion issue to me and she told me right off the bat she was pro-choice. And I said, well, I'm kind of a hybrid. And I started explaining my point of view. And at the end of the conversation, she said, I don't think I can be your friend anymore. And it was so painful to me. I was like, what? And I kept kind of reaching out to her, but there was a coldness between us and it was over. And so I wanted to understand this better. And this is one of the reasons I saw the film. And I was so heartened by two groups of people who feel so strongly getting to know each other and liking each other and caring about each other, even if they didn't agree. And it meant so much to me. And I'm really hoping that helps get the word out that we can have this conversation. Like you said, Molly, maybe in a structured way, but it can be had. So that's where I'm coming from. And that's why I'm really hoping that we can get the word out about the film. So maybe one of you could talk about your background. Molly?
Wynette, I'd love for you to start if you're up for it or interested. If that's okay.
Sure. Thank you, Molly. Well, my life began 60 years ago in 1962. I was an unplanned, unexpected, and unwanted. Let's see. And my mom is very pro-choice. it's only because of legal protection that I'm alive today. With that origin, I have a deeply heartfelt sense of solidarity with the fetus, the child, the human being that exists alive in the womb. But I also have great empathy for a woman who may be struggling with the news of a positive pregnancy test. For the last 18 years, I've been on the front lines of the pro-life movement here in California, serving both intimately, nearly on a daily basis through some of that time frame, out on the front lines of the sidewalk in front of the largest abortion provider, and then also in the state legislature, since I live near the capital city, as a voice for life there in that capacity. And being out on the sidewalk, I don't see myself as a protester. To me, it's a ministry of love. My main message and purpose for being there is to have a sign that says pregnant, ? Need help, ? And with a great sense of kindness and gentleness and compassion, empathy and love, coming alongside women who are facing that very life-changing situation in their journey. I'm there also with empathy for women, because when I was a college student, my best friend awoke on a Saturday morning, sobbing, rocking back and forth. And when I asked her what was wrong, she said, I'm pregnant and I'm going to have an abortion. And my dear friends, that would have been in the early 80s. That was before we had the internet and cell phones and instant information. We were two college kids who, we were embarrassed, distressed, and we made a decision in haste. My response was, that this was going to be an uncomfortable situation for her. And therefore my instinct was, give me a few minutes, let me get dressed and I'll go with you. We didn't consult our parents. We didn't look at any fetal development information for us at that time in our understanding. And essentially Cosmo magazine was our source of news and information. It was just like kind of like a genital wart type situation that could be easily removed and life could go back to so-called normal by Monday morning. However, I've seen, not just in my friend, but in hundreds of women that I've encountered through my 60 years of life, where that decision was not only very difficult at the time, but one that has stayed with them and not one that they've forgotten. And I think that that's oftentimes left out of the conversation. Being on those front lines, I've encountered literally thousands of women. And now, looking back, those that I met in that first few years of my ministry, those fetuses are now graduating from high school some 18 years later. And I've also developed, for which I'm very thankful, relationships with not only former clinic escorts and staff members, former abortionists. We've had people come out and visit. We've shared meals here in our home. We've had, women who needed assistance live here in our home. Those relationships are just so deeply rich components to the fabric of my life story. And my involvement with Braver Angels actually originated out of this very same subject matter, when a counter protester, someone who was from the other side, was already a member of Braver Angels and knew that there was an upcoming debate on abortion. And to his credit, he thought, my contribution might be of value. So that was about 3 years ago where I first found out about Braver Angels. And it was through that first encounter, I brought information, facts, fetal models and everything. And it was an exchange of opinions, but I was looking for something a little more substantive. facts and primary sourced information. And so that experience prompted me to, sorry, the sun keeps changing here in California. Okay. Prompted me to explore a project that I helped initiate here in California, but has spread across the country through Braver Angels. And that was Walk a Mile in My News, where, we're not just sharing opinions, but we're actually looking at our news sources, which can oftentimes be a siloed, polarizing component to our lives, but to be sharing that primary source of information so that we can actually see things from the perspective of those that may have a different opinion on these very deeply held subject matters. And so now, 3 years later, I serve as a co-chair in our Sacramento Alliance in Braver Angels. And after seeing this movie, we've really tried to apply it here in our community, looking at service projects as an example, where, no longer are you pro-life versus pro-choice, but you're caring, compassionate, thoughtful, kind people who can work together to help women who are in need. And as an example, we had a recent maternity home fundraising dinner, and I invited all of my Braver Angels friends to share a table with my husband and I. And I was really gratified by the response of local members of Braver Angels from both sides of the issue who came together for a good cause. And our table of 10 included people from both sides of the issue, as well as women that I have encountered personally at the sidewalk. And one memorable moment was when one of my blue close friends mentioned across the table, Juanette, tell us a little bit about how you know these special guests that joined us for that meal. And I allowed them, instead of answering it myself, I allowed the women to share how we first met and what our relationship has meant to them. And I think it was a real aha, eye-opening, heartwarming dialogue for my Braver Angels colleagues to hear really what we can do together. Within our alliance, we just had a recent event called Finding Common Ground in a Post-Roe California. And there were, again, many things positive elements that came out of that, which is also a reflection of this Abortion Talks documentary, which inspires people across the oftentimes dividing subject of abortion to really come together in the spirit of kindness and compassion to address oftentimes the underlying factors that contribute to women making this important decision in their lives. And so I'm here because I care about people, and I want to find really the best and the good in every person, no matter where they are on this subject. So it's really been a very positive component, this Abortion Talks documentary, to my life and to those that I am able to encourage along the way.
You are muted, Randy.
And I'm hoping that our going out there and pushing the film through this podcast get more people to hear it and to talk about it, just like you're using it, Juanette, and it made a big difference, I think, to all of us. Molly, maybe you can talk a little bit about the difference it made to you and your background as well and beliefs.
Sure. I'll start with just some personal views, but actually, even before that, I just want to say thank you, Annette, for sharing your incredible story of your own origins. I mean, literally your birth, and also for sharing the story of your activism and how it looks very different than the sort of vehement, intense protest, sometimes filled with animosity that we might see, on the news or in this movie, for sure. So I think you really provided another counter perspective, and I really admire that. I hope to come to your table at some point. So that's fantastic. I I'm really glad you went first too, because I think that for me, what you said was completely unexpected. I had some limited expectations of what you might share, and none of that was said actually. And I'm glad. I like to see that, I like to see my idea of what someone from the other side might say completely upturned, I guess is the word. So, and challenge. Well, I'll start with why I hold a different view of the issue. And I do think that, between the two of us, when not even us alone, might lead people more into the gray area. So I was the one, as I mentioned earlier, who didn't want to show this film. And as I had told Donna in the planning of it, that was partly because I viewed the film as having, not the film itself, because I hadn't seen the film yet, but I viewed the film as having potential to bring up just a basic religious difference that I saw this issue as easily bringing to the surface. And what I mean by that is, to me, the issue of whether you are pro-choice or pro-life comes down partly to your views on when life begins. And I know that at least in many, I don't know if all, but in many denominations of Christianity, life begins at conception. And I'm Jewish and I'm also observant. And in our religion, the dominant view that I have been taught, and I had to just kind of look it up and make sure I had this right last night, is that life begins after birth. And so, meaning when I say life begins, what I mean is you become a person. And so I think this matters because, when using the word fetus matters, and when you said these fetuses were graduating from college, that really brings to life the idea that, a fetus still becomes a person later. But in our tradition, in the Jewish tradition, the rabbis understood a fetus as not being yet a person, as still being part of the mother and tied to the mother. And so I didn't really want the film to come down to what could even become, what could devolve, maybe involve is the right word, but could grow into religious discussion about when life begins. And it's like, well, where's the conversation at that point? There's obviously a lot more complexity to this issue than that piece, but I just wanted to be upfront that informs what I'm about to say now. But I will just say that that's not like the main reason I'm pro-life. I also want to say that, even though life in Jewish tradition does begin at birth, that I'm not at all pro-abortion, if that makes sense. Pro-life is not the same as pro-abortion. And I had some clarity when doing research for today. I was reading an MIT project where they interviewed a lot of students. And I thought one student said this really well, that pro-abortion is not pro-life because really the idea of being pro-choice is that each woman can decide if she's comfortable with an abortion or not. And she might not even be, quote, pro-abortion, right? In the sense that an individual woman, by the time she's making that decision, as Mayor Pete says when he was talking about abortion and running for president, by the time she's making that decision, especially he was referring to in the third trimester, there already must be some problem with the health of the baby or the health of the mother. And it's not an easy decision. So you're making it even more complicated when you add in public policy as another factor to weigh. And so I mentioned that for Mayor Pete, who, being a man, it's a little less personal, but as someone who understands that this is already a really hard and challenging decision, I assume, for many women to make. It must be so hard to have a baby growing inside you and to decide not to have that baby. I mean, that sounds painful to me. I'm not a mother now. I am God willing, a future mother. And I have 11 nieces and nephews, and I love kids. I work with kids a lot. So I come to this as someone who, can't wait to be a mom and is really excited about it and understands that it must be so painful to make that decision. I think what drives my views politically is that I don't actually think that this should be decided by politicians and by laws. I think that it should be up to the mother and ideally the partner, in many cases, most cases, probably a man who she had the baby with. If he's present in the decision-making process and in the pregnancy, I think it should be up to them whether to have the child or not. And part of that is because it is a very dangerous situation sometimes about whether to have a baby or not. And I want that the woman should have a say in whether she's taking the risk of having the baby. And I'm sure in some sense this is nothing new for you, Wynette, but I'm hoping to add something new as I get into this piece. It's something I didn't understand until Roe v. Wade was essentially overturned recently, is that there is likely to be a growth in maternal mortality because of the shift in policy. And more specifically, this is, a big factor that I learned recently. More specifically, a study that I had seen out of CU Boulder, out of Colorado, was that it's predicted that there'll be a 21% increase in pregnancy-related deaths and a 33%, this is to back up for a moment. This is if there were a national ban on abortion, which is obviously a little different than just, a ban that allows people to decide, at a more localized level. But my point is basically to say here that at the point at which the ban were to be taken, if it were to be taken nationally, that it would lead to, again, a 21% increase in the number of pregnancy-related deaths overall, and a predicted 33% increase among Black women. This is according to new CU Boulder research. It's a study that was published October 21st in the journal Demography, if anyone wants to look it up. So that's one thing I realized, is it could lead to more deaths among women. And again, going back to when life begins, I think it's important to prioritize the life of the woman, this person in front of you who's had a full life so far, over the life of the fetus in this case. And I do want to say life of the fetus because I mean, there's still a baby growing inside you, and whether it's attached to the mother or not, you're still ending the potential for human life for sure. And that's a heavy thing. That's not something I take lightly at all. I guess also I would point out that I realize that if people want an abortion, they'll still try to seek an abortion even if it's illegal. And this is a major issue because abortions are more likely to be either unsafe, or they're likely to be sought after but less accessible to people because they're poor perhaps and can't travel. And so you've noticed two issues that I brought up at a higher level. One is a racial component. We're going to see more women potentially die from pregnancy-related deaths, but also specifically more Black women. And then it becomes something that really affects people because of their race in part. And also the travel issue is something that affects people because of their income. And so then it becomes both a racial issue and an issue of inequality, because some people want to travel and can't, and some people might seek out unsafe abortions because they are just unable to reach another state, 100 miles away that has a safe abortion. I read even—
Molly, it seems clearly you and Wynette come from very different perspectives for different reasons. I'm wondering, given that, and we're not going to decide the rights and wrongs of abortion during this podcast, but given the film and the gist of the film, how did the film affect you and impact you in terms of where you're coming from and how you see the bigger picture?
Sure. Thank you for hopping in there. Let me switch gears a little here. I think the film specifically didn't change my opinion. One thing I want to mention actually prior to that, Randy, is that Wynette said something that really resonated with me. And this is one last point that I didn't get to that that Wynette's points tied into, is that so many kids who are born from unsafe pregnancies, who maybe weren't wanted, are more likely to end up, I think, more likely to end up say adopted or in foster care. And because we have about 24,000 kids age out of foster care, I think there's an issue about long-term society caring for those children. And one thing that I love that you said, Wynette, is that you do want to make sure that people think about the child they're having and how to have a safe pregnancy, and maybe how to deal with the aftermath of having an actual child, right? And so I think that's really important, that society as a whole cares for the kids that come after, and that we make policies that allow for, kids to be cared for and not aging out of foster care, right, at age 18 and having no one to go to. So in terms of returning to the film itself, the way it impacted me is probably not what some people are expecting, which is that I realized that maybe a lot of leaders on different issues, including abortion, are meeting, and we don't even realize it, and trying to make policy happen that will trickle down. So it made me feel like that maybe there's these secret meetings happening in other times and other places that are informing policy. And it made me feel like there's this whole world that we don't know about that's happening, at the same time that we're all out in public places, just being, in my case, being a citizen who votes and is a politically active citizen, but who's not actually, making public policy the way, or affecting public policy the way these women would. The fact that it was shown in secret, that's what made me really curious to see that part of the film. It was very hard to watch the first half of the film. It was really hard to learn about the murders at the clinics. And it was really hard to think about what, like what gets someone to that point where they'll actually kill on it about, over an issue that hurts. Think of a human being making that decision, and it still hurts. Then second half of the film gave me a lot of hope. So that's probably the big effect I want to focus on here, is that if these leaders who spend their lives on pro-life and being pro-choice could go from vilifying each other to becoming close friends and even lose friends over the friendships they were forming, then maybe almost anyone who's willing to sit down and take that time to develop a relationship and hear each other's stories has that same potential to build relationships. But, and a big but here, I saw some limits to the film. They didn't talk about influencing public policy much. And that really bothers me. I want to see these women taking these conversations into Congress and talking to politicians and talking to focus groups among the general population to try to influence policy and come to a way that we can meet in the middle, that we can compromise on this issue and others. So I see what they did as a model, but I wanted to see it in the general population being applied, much the way that Braver Angels works on issues among everybody, among your, quote, average citizen. And I also wanted to see how they actually influence policy in Boston and in Massachusetts. So I feel like, yes, it gave me hope that people can talk, but I don't want the conversation to be the end. I want actually influencing public policy to be part of the end result.
So it did influence you. And I do believe that their film was more than one film, Donna. I don't know, is that the case? That they had a series of films that they were hoping to show on this issue eventually?
Well, the first, I said it was 4 hours, and the first part of it was about the murders and about finding the murderer and then bringing that murderer to justice in a trial. And interestingly enough, one reason they did that is because of the popularity of true crime on streaming services. Mm-hmm. And they thought that if people thought this is a whodunit, it starts out that way, that they might be more likely to start to watch it and then realize that there is really a talk about the dialogue and these women coming together.
Okay. It was just really heartening just to hear the four of us talk afterwards and to see that we can. I understand, Molly, what you were saying about influencing public policy, and that would be really the ideal, because I think for the most part, most people, if we sit down, can have a conversation, even if we vehemently disagree. So I really thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this. And I know it was a little, it was a little overwhelming to get us all together and the times together and the time zones together, but we did it. And, we were flexible enough to make this happen. And I really, really thank you. And hopefully this will go forward.
I just wanted to add another perspective. For me, I grew up Catholic, and for the Catholic Church, life begins at conception. I left the Catholic Church as an adult. I'm now a Unitarian Universalist. And for Unitarian Universalists, it's up to the woman to decide. That's their point of view, is that it's what the woman believes to make that choice. I wanted to add a perspective that I think is maybe unusual, and it's this. I am a big believer in reincarnation, and I don't know when the soul enters a fetus, or if the soul enters the fetus at birth, or if it enters it at quickening. I don't know. But anyway, I do believe that our souls continue on, that life continues on after this life. And for those pro-life people, this perspective may be just interesting that life doesn't really, in my view, life doesn't end after the end of life here, whether that end is through an abortion or through natural death or whatever. But it continues on, and that there are other opportunities for birth in the future. Just another perspective.
That does add another layer to this conversation, doesn't it? And a level of thought that from many of us, we don't think about. So thank you, Donna.
That's very fascinating. And also, Randy, I wanted to just mention a theme that I've seen through today and throughout the film, and especially from Wynette's account today. Don't want to diminish it, but her many stories. I feel like, Wynette, you flagged this in your message to me, that there's been a lot of kindness and compassion throughout this process. I see, Wynette, how kind and compassionate you feel towards the women who you're meeting at clinics. I feel kindness and compassion, between us and the group. And I also saw a lot of kindness and empathy and I guess compassion in the movie for each other between the women. And so I think that that's really what this comes down to, is having enough respect for each other's views to listen and really hear each other, and then, share our views in a tactful, respectful way. And out of that kind of compassion can grow a relationship and ideally a friendship. And then the next step is to see where you can you have an influence together on public policy. So I wanted to mention that I just saw so much kindness and listening, and that's really important to me. So thank you.
And I think that kindness really softens everybody and allows us to take in and hear and understand, and yes, maybe someday influence policy. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this, and let's kind of keep the message going. Thank you. This podcast was brought to you by Braver Angels. If you're interested in learning more about what we do, please go to braverangels.org and learn more about our organization.